welcome to our first public event of the fall of this academic year. The first of many. Tomorrow afternoon, we're going to be hosting one with the Institute for Data, Democracy, and Politics down in Jack Morton from 2 to 4 on the increasingly important topic of social media harassment of independent researchers and some new tools that are being developed by IDDP and others to combat that harassment. On Tuesday, we're back here with the first of 3 events this fall with campaigns and elections. Tuesday's event will have a Republican consultant, a Democratic consultant, an SMPA student, and me talking about how the campaigns are getting at the vote in 2024. We're going to have a similar event in October, and then in November we're going to look back at what on earth just happened in the election. We're going to have other events with Lance Bennett, one of America's leading political scientists, is going to come in and to receive the Robert M. Entman Award later this fall. We have events before and after the election on public diplomacy, on the role of Christian nationalism, and a host of other topics. So stay tuned. I think it's really terrific, though, that we're starting this academic year with this panel, because the conversation is really sort of the ground rules of democracy. And what role do the media play in supporting, enforcing, maintaining democratic norms? And I'm really pleased to have the first conversation with Michael Tomasky, hopefully one of many talks with Tomasky and democracy. I don't know, we're workshopping it to see how it goes. It does have a ring to it. We were introduced by Professor Ethan Porter, who I believe you were Ethan's first boss in DC.
I think I was, yeah.
So which is pretty cool. Michael Tomasky is one of the country's leading thinkers on democracy. He's a columnist, he's an author, and he's going to be talking to 3 of our colleagues about how all of this goes. I'll introduce them, and then I will turn this over to you, sir. So first of all is Michael Tomasky. I could read the bio that was handed to me, or I'll just read one from the back of his book. Columnist for the Daily Beast, contributing opinion writer for the New York Times, regular contributor for the New York Review of Books, editor of Democracy, a Journal of Ideas, editor of the New Republic, and the author of a number of books, including 2019's If We Can Keep It, How the Republic Collapsed and How It Might Be Saved, a really terrific read. He will be talking to Professor Jesse Holland, the Associate Director of the School of Media and Public Affairs, spent 20 years as a journalist at the Associated Press, has covered Congress and campaigns. He's an award-winning historian, and as all of you know, he's also the author of Marvel Universe books, including The Black Panther, the forthcoming Captain America, and others. He's the only person any of you will ever meet who went directly from the Association of Black Journalists Conference to Comic-Con and was on panels at both. Our other esteemed journalist is Gene Cummings, who's an an adjunct professor here, just joined SMPA this fall. Has spent a career at the Wall Street Journal, most recently as deputy bureau chief in the Washington Bureau of the Wall Street Journal, was the journal's political editor overseeing coverage of the 2016 presidential campaign and the 2018 midterms, so has lived many of the decisions that we're going to be talking about this evening. And Jean also joined Bloomberg from Politico. Before she had the journal, she was at Bloomberg, went there from Politico, where she served as assistant managing editor in charge of enterprise and wrote a regular column, Pit Boss, focusing on connections between business and politics. And the coolest thing I like about doing events at an SMPA is, we're drowning in smart people in Washington, D.C. You can go to any place all over town and talk to people like Michael Tomasky or Jesse Holland or Gene Cummings. The thing that we have that nobody else has is SMPA students. And so every chance we get, we try to feature an SMPA or a GW student. And this evening is Liddy Lake, graduating senior in journalism and minoring in political science, graduating in a couple of months with a degree in journalism. So I believe you've already talked to a couple of the journalists on the panel. Excellent, excellent. Editorial intern at the American Prospect, staff writer for The Hatchet, and an SMPA ambassador. Thank you for being an ambassador, and thanks for what you're doing. I'm going to get out of the way, turn it over to Michael Tomasky, who's going to make some introductory remarks, leave it to the panel. With luck, we'll get a chance to have conversation or questions from all of you all. At about 5 till 7, Sarah or somebody in the back is going to wave at you to say we've got about 5 minutes. We'll wrap and call it a night. So with that, okay. Michael Tomasky.
Well, thanks, Peter. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. Really, thanks for coming. I remember what it was like to be in college and take time out of your evening to come to something like this. Not that many people are willing to do it, so I appreciate it. We all appreciate it. And thanks for your interest. I assume you're all maybe at least maybe going to be journalists, have some interest in journalism. Thank you for that, too, because we need smart people to do this and to carry this torch in these very challenging times. So let's talk about journalism and democracy and journalism's responsibility to democracy. First of all, does good political journalism have a responsibility to democracy? Not everybody agrees that the answer to that question is an automatic yes, as surprising as that may seem. There was an interview earlier this year by Ben Smith of Semaphore with a man named Joseph Kahn, an executive editor at the New York Times. And Ben was asking him, this went pretty viral, as you might imagine when you hear what I'm about to say. Ben was asking him if he, Joe Kahn, felt that the New York Times had a responsibility to democracy, and he said essentially no. Democracy is one of several issues in play in this election, and that the New York Times had no responsibility to necessarily defend democracy, that it just needed to present whether or not Donald Trump or anyone else was a threat to democracy as an issue for their readers and let their readers decide. I don't agree. I think we do have a responsibility to democracy, and I think it's historic, and I think it's pretty profound. You may have heard the phrase "the fourth estate," right? Have you heard that? The press is the fourth estate. Anybody know where that comes from? It comes from the French Revolution. And in the French Revolution, there were three estates, they were called. There were three interests, three classes of people who were fighting for power. Estate one was the clergy. They were the most important. The second estate was the nobility. They were the second most important. And then the third estate was the masses, the people. The French Revolution was the first time when political pamphleteering, political polemicizing, political opinion writing really became a very important thing in democracy, sort of contemporaneous to the American Revolution, actually. They happened around the same time, obviously. But there was a lot of political journalism going on in Paris in the late 1780s and early 1790s, such that it was elevated to its own estate, right? So you had the clergy, the nobility, the people, and the press. That's how important, that's where the phrase fourth estate comes, and that's how important the press was thought to be. So with roots like that, yeah, I kind of think we do have a responsibility to democracy. And I think that over the years and decades, I'm going to compress this and do this very shortly. In general, I think the American model of media, objective mainstream reporting, such as is practiced by the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Associated Press, and so on, has done a pretty good job of being that guardian of democracy against its assaulters. There have been a lot of occasions where they didn't do such a good job. But on balance, there have been guardrails, and the press has respected and defended those guardrails reasonably well. I don't think that we were ready for someone like Donald Trump, and I think that he has represented a unique threat to those guardrails. And I'll talk about two things, let's say, conventions of traditional objective news reporting that I think someone like Trump particularly challenges. One is a sort of nuts and bolts mechanics thing. It's just kind of the way you write a campaign news story or the way you write a political news story. I've written a lot of them. I've covered a lot of campaigns. I've watched a lot of politicians give speeches. And I've been on the campaign trail a number of times. The way you cover that is there's kind of a formula to it. You know, first of all, you spend hours standing around before something happens, and then they give the speech, and you decide what you're going to quote from that speech, and you decide how you're going to summarize the speech, and you know, you want to get to the heart of what they said, what's new, what's newsy, and what expresses most pithily and directly what they're trying to say. whether they're a Democrat or a Republican, whether you agree or disagree, your job is to give the essence of what they're saying. And you as a reporter, in doing that, you are sort of tacitly, in my view, like colluding with the candidate, because you're putting on you're using their best quote, you know? You're using their best expression of their position, and you're throwing the rest of it on the cutting room floor. Well, does that really work with Donald Trump? I mean, he says a lot of weird things, and you know, a lot of, I would say, alarmingly weird things, and things that call his mental fitness into question. And to throw those on the cutting room floor, is that the right choice? Is that a defensible choice? This thing he said the other day about the big faucet in Northern California, I checked. It was on cable news, it was on Twitter, it was on some liberal outlets, but it didn't make a lot of mainstream outlets, or it was way down in the story. Is that the right choice? Is that a small d democratic choice? I think it's an interesting question, because here you have a guy who just isn't making sense. I mean, just isn't making sense, and he wants to be the president of the United States. Should that not in and of itself be a news story? There may be a difference of opinion up here on this stage tonight about that. We'll see. I don't know. But I think it should be. I think when somebody talks like that and wants to be the president, the mere fact of that is a story. So that's one point that I'd like to make. The second point I'd like to make is a sort of bigger point about the values of traditional, objective, mainstream journalism. There are basically two guiding values, in my view. One is truth, right? We want to tell the truth. We want to paint a true picture of what we're reporting on. And the second is fairness. We want to be fair to both sides, or all sides, if there are more than two, as there often are. And we want to accomplish both of those goals. Usually, that's fine. Usually those two aren't in conflict. Lately, in this country, I think those two in political reporting are frequently in conflict. Because if one candidate is telling, you know, more or less the truth with the normal the normal amount of embellishment that a politician gives, but the other side is just completely talking bullshit and lies, well, there, truth and fairness clash, right? Truth and fairness clash. They can't sit comfortably together. It's very hard to achieve both, because if you want to be fair to the people who are telling lies, if you want to print the quotes about cats being sautéed and dogs being barbecued, well, those are lies. So if you're printing those, how are you serving the truth? So these are serious questions for journalism, and I believe that, you know, bending too far in the direction of fairness doesn't serve democracy. I believe, distressingly, a number of outlets kind of choose fairness over truth, and I think we should choose truth over fairness. And therewith, I conclude my introductory remarks. Gene Cummings, what do you think of all that? Gene, by the way, Gene was editing political copy at the Wall Street Journal in 2016.
In the hot seat.
Yeah, so she had to make a lot of these decisions in real time, and I would be the first to say I've never been in that hot seat.
It's uncomfortable,
yeah,
and it
so
was then.
Yeah, and I didn't have to make these decisions, so it's easy for me to say. So I yield.
Well, we didn't know what was coming at us, and for a long time, people thought he was just going to be this kind of celebrity candidate, and not a serious one. Then he grew increasingly serious, and then he was very much a contender and a nominee. And so it was an evolution that we had to go through in covering him. If you go back and you look at 2016, my job then was not nearly as bad as it is now for the political editors sitting on those seats today. because in 2016, there was a structure around Trump that was trying to make him look and have a machine that looked presidential. So he had issues that he was running on, and he would talk about regularly. So in that respect, there were ways to sort of cover him like a traditional candidate. In the debates, he went off the rails. They became difficult, but he wanted to overturn ACA. He wanted to build a wall. He had real issues he was running on that we could judge what is his real plan, how much would they cost, how would it affect people. We could do kind of regular political coverage. I believe the turning point came with Charlottesville when the white supremacists came out in the dark and screamed a bunch of slurs, and Trump said there were good people on both sides. That's where there was a turning point. And after that, he started saying more and more things that were very difficult to read. He was playing both sides off the other or not telling the truth. And at the time, what we concluded is that we say what he says, and then there's always a paragraph after it or a sentence after it that says there's no evidence of blank. Now, there's so much untruth, it's almost hard to quote him, because if you do a direct quote, you're repeating something isn't true. So it's a very big challenge for the news media today. But it's a unique challenge so far, really. He does it a lot. He does it in a big way. There are others who are trying to emulate him. So it may become a chronic problem, but we'll have to see if that's what develops. In terms of the media role in defending democracy, I don't know that I'd put it that way. I think the way that I'd put it is that we play a very important role in helping our democracy work and function. And I'll give an example. In 2011, the LA Times won a Pulitzer for an investigation it did of a small town called Bell, city of Bell. It was one of the poorest towns in Los Angeles County. And what they discovered is the city manager was making over $850,000. The police chief was making $500,000, double that of the police chief in Los Angeles. So it was an amazing scandal. It brought the entire government down, and it was good for our democracy. That government was not functioning in a way that the citizens wanted it to function, but they didn't know. And so it took the media to go in, find it out, and tell them. Fast forward a little more than a decade, and there's now, or just ended, another major scandal, this time in Los Angeles, where there was an extensive bribery case involving one of the city council members and a host of foreign developers who wanted to bypass all the regulations around LA and get permits for their work. And one way they got it was taking the city council member to luxurious vacations in Las Vegas and giving him thousands of free chips in the casinos. And it went on for years. And the FBI came out with the revelations of its investigation about a year ago. Lots of people were indicted. This guy's going to jail. But in their documents, the FBI said one of the reasons that this corruption was able to flourish for years, one of the reasons, not all, but one of the reasons was that there was not a presence of aggressive and local news media. Mm-hmm. That's how important we are to ensuring our democracy functions in a way that we're all proud of and that we expect it to.
That's a really important point that I hope we can return to about local media. Jesse, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'm going to disagree slightly here. Charlottesville wasn't when the coverage of Trump went off the rails.
No, I meant he went off the rails.
Charlottesville wasn't when he went off the rails.
Okay.
He went off the rails from the beginning when he started questioning the birth of President Barack Obama,
Yes.
and media let him get away with it.
Yeah.
Media let him make it a topic, and were afraid to say from the beginning, this is a lie. Then go on to him coming down the staircase and him saying rapists and murderers are coming across the border, and media let him say it, didn't say it was a lie. And actually had to have conversations over what is a lie. So he's been challenging the norms as far as journalism goes from way before he became president, and had journalists question what they can and cannot say without seeming to be advocates rather than reporters. One of the things that we need to be sure of is what we're actually talking about when we talk about media, because reporters, their job, the job of reporters is not to defend democracy. The job of reporters is to say, here's what happened, as close to the truth as we can give it to you. Mm-hmm. It might be the job of columnists and of newspapers as an institution, television networks as an institution, to defend democracy. But if you think it was tough editing those stories, imagine being a reporter at a Trump rally. Imagine being a reporter out in the field in 2016, as I was, talking to people and having people tell me to my face, journalism is a lie, because you're not saying what we want you to say. Mm. So there's a fine line we have to walk when we start talking about journalism as a whole, because journalism is not just reporters. It's not just columnists. It's also photographers. It's also editors. It's also videographers. These days, it's social media as well. Everyone doesn't have the same responsibility. You can't for journalism to work. But when you start talking higher level, when you start talking the New York Times as an institution, you start talking Fox News as an institution, we're talking about something completely different than when we're talking about the reporters out in the field talking to Americans. Because columnists and editors, they don't talk to voters. Right. They only react to what reporters tell them voters are saying. It's a whole different category when you're the person standing out there being told that your industry is a lie. And why do you think that? Well, because the New York Times opinion page says this, or the Wall Street Journal opinion page said that, or a columnist or a commentator on Fox News said this. Sean Hannity said this. Rachel Maddow said this. So journalism is a lie. So one of the things that really is important if we consider ourselves to be defenders of democracy is educating our readers, viewers, and listeners on what our responsibility is and what their responsibility is. For example, take the story about the police chief making ridiculous amounts of money. What if the media had written that story and the voters had said, it's okay with us?
Well, they could have done that, but they didn't.
Currently, right now, in Washington, D.C., there's a councilman who is under investigation for bribery. He is on the ballot. The media has written about it. What if he's reelected? Who's defending democracy there? The media's done their job. They've said this is going on. Now it's up to the voters to make a decision. It's not I don't think it's our responsibility to tell the voters, don't vote for that guy. So, especially not as a reporter. Yeah. The institutions, the Washington Times as an institution, the Washington Post as an institution, their opinion pages may say that, but that's not the only journalism going on in town. So we have to be careful when we say journalism should do this, because there's more than one facet.
Liddy, how does this look to your generation, all this stuff? I mean, we're old timers, you know, and but you know, you guys, you know, take in information in so many different ways. So just how does this, what the three of us have been saying for the last 20 minutes, fall on the ears of someone of your generation?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you are on social media as much as I am, or on TikTok as much as I am, which is about every day, a lot of you might have seen a trend lately going around of these influencers dancing to a sound that is remixed to something that Trump said at the debate about Haitian immigrants eating pets in Springfield, Ohio. And seeing this as someone who studies journalism is pretty disheartening, because this is a sound that these influencers who have thousands, millions of followers and have built a level of trust with a whole audience, they are creating videos to this sound, but they are not spreading the information on the impacts that Haitians in Springfield are actually facing from things that Trump has said. They are not addressing the fact that these are lies. They are just turning his lies essentially into a trend. And that's a whole new threat that social media is facing with Trump, because we can see a lot of things that any political candidate says are turned into memes, essentially. Some of them are funny, I will admit that, but we also have to be really careful about what we're spreading around. And then I think when it comes to journalists' role in that, as social media adapts and journalism changes, all journalists need to be on this kind of social media. And while they might not be able to combat every single thing that is being spread on social media, because it's such an instantaneous atmosphere of information, they need to build a platform for themselves and combat these things right away in real time. And it's going to be really hard for journalists going into the future, but social media and information that spreads on there is going to be huge for people in the coming years. So that's what I think about that first point. When it comes to journalists' role in promoting democracy, I have to agree with a lot of the things Professor Holland said. I would like to say that journalism and democracy goes hand in hand. We have a history in it. And essentially, journalists' role is to provide information to people so they can make informed decisions about who they're voting for and about the people that are going to represent them. We can see instances where this has essentially failed in Europe. I was abroad last semester and covered a lot of stories on the post-communist nations like Hungary and Slovakia, where essentially we see the role of journalism and free press decreasing and the rise of authoritarianism. And so it's really scary when someone who is running for political office says things like, if you vote for me, you'll never have to vote again, because we can see a rise in authoritarianism like we're seeing in Europe, and ultimately with that we're going to see a decrease in free media and independent media.
I want to follow up with you on your first point. I read a poll earlier this year that was a little bit depressing to me as a news person, but that's the world these days. 10% of people get their news from newspapers in this poll, and 70% from TikTok. Now, my daughter, my 14-year-old daughter.
Was there an age range on that poll?
I don't remember, Gene. I think, but it was adults. It was adult respondents. Maybe it was weighted toward young people. I can't remember. I was a little surprised at the 70, but I do know that older people. It's not just 18-year-olds who. Anyway. My 14-year-old daughter shows me some TikToks. She's pretty political, and she's into the campaign, and she shows me what I would call good ones, sort of ones that correct the misimpressions given by one of the sides in this election. And so I'd like to ask you, just in your experience, is TikTok, does it lean toward gross misinformation, or does it lean toward, fact-checking and truth-telling?
When it comes to TikTok, it's all about algorithms.
Yeah.
So it really highly depends on who is holding the phone and what kind of content that they're looking for.
Yeah.
Depending what side you're leaning towards, TikTok and the algorithm is going to know how you're going to react. They're going to see how you react to that content, and then they're going to form your algorithm based on that. So if you're someone like me who's definitely more political and into fact-checking, I see a lot more kind of citizen journalism on my TikTok page that is promoting the actual truths that are happening. But if it's in someone else's hands who who isn't like that, essentially, who doesn't know what they want to vote for, who leans into kind of the entertainment aspect of it, they're going to see a completely whole different feed that could essentially be spreading that misinformation.
And as the other young person on the panel, who also has a TikTok account, let me just add that it's also about entertainment. If you come up with something that people will stay and watch, it doesn't matter whether it's true or false. It's gonna flow through social media, not just TikTok. It's going to be copied over to Threads. It's going to end up on Twitter or X or whatever we're calling it this week. It's going to end up on Facebook. It's going to flow through social media, not because it's true, because it's entertaining. And that's something that we have to, I almost want to say fight in journalism, because there's a lot of journalism that's not entertaining. It's necessary, but it isn't funny. It isn't viral. It's necessary, but do we need to start thinking about making our journalism entertaining to get on these social media threads where the readers and the people who are making decisions actually are? And to also jump back to your comments on Prague and journalism failing, there are specific instances we can point to here in the United States where reporting failed. George Santos was able to make it into Congress because there weren't local journalists to investigate his claims before he was elected.
Actually, one did.
One.
But they did. They did. But you're right. I blame Santos on the big outlets because the local outlet did cover it, and his opponent, his Democratic opponent, tried to call attention to it. And it
Maybe he should have made a funny dance.
Yeah,
It ended
right.
up on TikTok.
Right. It wasn't, but as you point out, it wasn't until after the election that the New York Times and others dug in, and the house of cards fell. The truth is, the New York Times covers congressional races. The Wall Street Journal does. Politico does. The Washington Post does. And everybody didn't do it, which is appalling. You know, you can understand when you're in a journalism desert where there isn't a good local media outlet to do the kind of work that traditionally has been done to be watchdogs on local and state officials or candidates. And one point I meant to make when I gave the LA Times example is the difference between 2011 and today is that newsroom has been decimated.
Right.
So it's not a journalism desert, but it's on its way. But no way is New York a journalism desert, and even they screwed up and let a con man get into
like
Congress.
you said, did they screw up? Journalism did what it was supposed to. There were stories written about George Santos. No one read them. No one cared. And that's where I wonder about the whole role of journalism in defending democracy, because we can do the work. It's on the readers to care. We can't make the readers care. All we can do is the exposure, do the exposés, but what if you write it, it's like, what if you build it and no one shows up? What if you write it and no one cares?
That guy worked for a pretty small paper that had a very small circulation. I mean, I was a journalist in New York City. I covered New York City politics for 20-something years. I can guarantee you, 10 years ago, Santos would have been busted. He never would have gotten to Congress, or certainly 20 years ago. The Daily News, Newsday, without question.
Right.
Newsday without question would have been all over the story. The New York Times 20 years ago, when I was young reporting in New York, had 4 or 5 people covering congressional primaries. They probably have 1 now. I don't know for sure, but you know, this is a thing that is it's been happening. It's going to keep happening. On the other hand, there are some local websites that are good.
Oh, there are great experiments going on out there. The Baltimore Beacon is a fine example of
The
it.
Texas Tribune.
Yes, yeah, there are experiments in Wisconsin. There's an experiment in Atlanta. It is part of the mission of Axios to create local reporting place reporters in state capitals
Yeah.
to do the kind of work that have been done traditionally by newspapers and the wire services. But this goes to kind of the core problem Jesse's talking about, is people don't necessarily want to pay for that. So that, how do you sustain it if people aren't going to pay for it? And that's a problem that is every journalism outlet is confronting right now. You know, how do you do it? Do you make it more entertaining, or do you go granular and you make it news that they absolutely have to have, like if they're going to send their kid to school the next day? It's just a very big challenge in terms of what people will pay for when it comes to journalism now.
What do you, I don't want to put you on the spot here, but like what, in the context of this discussion about local journalism, and as you think about the job market and what you want to do, would you consider something like that? Would you consider working at Des Moines, you know, and covering state politics in Iowa?
Oh yeah, well absolutely. As someone from Rochester, Minnesota, so not
Oh,
too
okay.
far.
Yeah, right. Okay.
I think local journalism is so important. Even when I was younger, I think when I was in middle school, I saw my local paper die out, and it's really sad because it cuts off access to information. So people don't know who they're voting for, or they don't know the information about the people they're voting for. And I think local journalism is important because people experience things more at the local level than at the national level. So the people who they vote for locally are a lot more important for the short term, at least, and they really need to have that information on those people that could possibly represent them in office.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would absolutely, yeah. It's a place where a lot of reporters start too, and then make their way up.
It is.
I mean, I actually said this to one of my classes today, that I remember a day when even mid-sized cities had 2 newspapers at the absolute minimum. I worked for the Birmingham Post-Herald, which was the evening paper, and the Birmingham News was the morning paper. In fact, I'm from a small town in Mississippi called Holly Springs, population of just about 7,000. And Holly Springs, growing up, had 2 newspapers, the South Reporter and the Marshall Chronicle. The South Reporter still exists. The Marshall Chronicle is long gone. But there was a time where there was enough journalists out there that these George Santos stories and there was enough investigative journalists out there where you could say journalism is defending your democracy. Now it's like going to a gunfight with 1 bullet and being accused of not doing your job when the resources just aren't there. And luckily, there are a lot of local micro-journalism sites showing up. In fact, we have at least one SMPA student who started up a news organization in Kingston Springs, Tennessee, because her hometown newspaper had gone out of business, and there was no journalism being done in her town. So she started it up herself, and still today, they're still running this local newspaper, the Kingston Springs, I think it's the Kingston Spring Times. It's the Gazette, the Kingston Spring Gazette, that's being run by one person who understands the importance of local journalism. And so I think the need is still there. I think the desire is still there. It's, and like everything else, it's all about the money. Can you survive doing it?
I want to turn the conversation back to Donald Trump a little bit. And so I was talking about this clash of truth and fairness and Trump's, and then the question of Trump's mental fitness for office. The press made a big deal of Joe Biden's age, right? When Joe Biden was the Democratic standard bearer. I remember front page or above the fold on the homepage, New York Times stories, specifically about Biden's age. I don't recall seeing many.
I suspect they're coming.
You think they're coming?
Yeah, I suspect that
You
they're
are more optimistic than I am.
So
Oh,
should
no,
there
I'm
be?
also
So
informed.
good. Okay, we got a little. We got some inside dope here. So let me. So with respect to something like the thing that I mentioned, that riff he went on about the giant faucet in Northern California.
My personal favorite is that he characterized it the audience at the debate.
Yeah, right.
They went wild.
The audience went wild at the debate. There
didn't
was no
exist.
audience. There were fewer people there than you guys. So is that a story? Like, if you're an editor, is that simple fact? Trump goes on riff about giant faucet in California.
Right. These are, like I said, I think we'll be seeing things, but and one of the reasons these are really delicate stories, because you're talking about the mental fitness of another human being, and so they just have to be reported very carefully. They have to be written very carefully, and there's got to be a fair amount of evidence to go with the story. Now, the Wall Street Journal ran a story on Biden's fitness.
Oh, yeah.
Yep, like 3 weeks before the debate. And
Hugely controversial, much attacked,
and,
kind of
well,
vindicated by
it
his
wasn't,
debate
I
performance.
mean, if I had been there as the editor, there were things I would have changed. It was not as well written as the Journal typically does. The only two people quoted in the story were the two Republican speakers, Kevin McCarthy and the current speaker. There was not a Democrat quoted. So the story lacked any kind of balance. I mean, even if they had put in a off-the-record Democrat who wouldn't be named, that would have helped the story. And for the standards typical at the Wall Street Journal, for those of us who are veterans, we were appalled that they didn't demand even an unnamed Democrat in that story. But that's an issue of balance, not truth, right? The story was true. And, 3 weeks later, when Biden walked onto the debate stage, the entire world saw how true that story was. But I know the reporters who wrote that worked on it for 2.5 months. These are not stories you just throw together. Patience.
Yeah. All right. Jesse? Mental fitness, is that too delicate for?
Oh, it has to be
journalism?
covered.
Yeah.
It does have to be covered, but it seems like it is covered by someone talking about it. It's not covered by observation. Donald Trump said this week that President Biden doesn't know what he's doing. Oh, now we need to write stories about President Biden's fitness. I know that's not how it happened, but from an outsider view, it seems like a lot of these topics are not driven by observation, they're driven by political animus. There's no way a story should be written about someone's mental fitness that only quotes members of the opposing party. That should never have been printed. Because you can easily say, why don't we write a story quoting Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer talking about Donald Trump's mental fitness? Yeah. And if any news organization did that, Republicans would be screaming about unfairness. So it seems, as an observer, that some politicians are held to one standard, while Donald Trump himself is held to a Trump standard, where it's okay if he just says anything, because that's just Donald Trump. We know he'll immediately have people say he didn't mean it, he was joking, but it's already said at that point. It's already in the conversation, while we expect other politicians to know better, and we hold them to a completely different standard. We were talking about truth versus fairness. Is it true because someone said it? Donald Trump says cats and dogs are being eaten in Ohio. Is that enough for us to print it just because it's being said? Or do we actually do the job and go do what the Wall Street Journal eventually did, is go to the person who said it and say, where's your cat? It's in the basement. Why wasn't that done on day one? Why did we get several news cycles of this conversation before it takes a reporter?
It's because it was in his echo chamber. It was at his rallies. It was on Fox News. It was in Trump's echo chamber.
But is that an excuse for everyone else to just follow behind the echo chamber?
No, I'm not making excuses. I think they didn't see it. They didn't hear it. And so, I mean, I give ABC credit for anticipating, you know, they obviously had studied his remarks at rallies to prepare some of their questions or to prepare for what could be a surprising result. And so they were ready when the dogs and cats appeared on the debate stage. And, you know, I think John Muir did a really good job of saying, I spoke to the mayor, and it's not true. So, but I think that there are times when a lot of what is happening in Trump universe is closed off from mainstream media that aren't attending rallies
And
or monitoring every single Fox interview.
And let me just jump in one. You said when John Mayer said, I talked to the city manager, good job. I said, when I heard him say that, why did you talk to the manager? Why didn't you send one of your ABC reporters to the woman who said it? That's, to me, that was the failing. And that's a lot, I say this a lot. We, as journalists, since the pandemic, depend too much on our telephones. All it took was going to the woman's house and seeing the cat in the basement to end that story. But there might not have been an ABC reporter in that town because of cutbacks. Who knows? Maybe they were doing the best they could. But sometimes we depend too much on talking to officials and getting official thought and not talking to actual voters. Sorry.
That's okay. All interesting. By the way, a year from now, 2 years from now, one of the great trivia questions about this election campaign is going to be, what was the name of that cat? Miss Sassy. I love that name. Now, I want to turn back to you, Liddy, and ask you about something that has come up here that we have to tackle before we go. There are really two medias in this country now. There's the mainstream media and the right-wing media. Now, I'm old enough to remember when Fox News came on the air in 1996, and October of 1996, right in time for the election. In those days, the mainstream media was like this, and the right-wing media was like this. It was like a beach ball versus a baseball. These days, with the cutbacks we've been discussing about, the mainstream media is smaller, and the right-wing media has gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. It's not just Fox News. We use Fox News as a shorthand, but it's Fox News, Newsmax, One America News, Sinclair. Do you guys know what Sinclair does? I mean, they own so many local television and radio stations, hardcore right-wing, just bought the Baltimore Sun. The right-wing media is growing and growing and growing, and believe me, they have no intention of stopping anytime soon. They have billionaires who will put many, many billions of dollars into it. It's like Viktor Orban said, the Hungarian prime minister said when he was invited to CPAC, to speak to CPAC, he said, the first thing, have your own media. So there's going to be a day, not far away, when the right-wing media in this country is bigger than the mainstream media. I'm guessing you don't watch a lot of Fox, but what's your and your generation's impression of this phenomenon, which is kind of new historically?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a big question. I would say there is a lot more happening. You know, I talked about social media earlier. There's going to be a lot more that our generation is going to see with social media, and I don't know that that'll help mainstream media or what, help it grow. But the thing about social media is that it's free and it's accessible, and it's a platform where citizen journalism can happen. Any big outlets can go on there and promote their space on there. And this can be utilized really well. You know, I saw in Hungary when I was covering them, they don't have a lot of mainstream media. A lot of their media is controlled through radio and television. So social media is the one pocket where people who want to report neutrally and from a fair background can publish their content. And they don't have to worry about restrictions from the government or from pro-government leaders, billionaires that can alter their media. So I think looking at examples like that where the government has so much control over radio and TV,
Yeah.
but social media is kind of showing something different, and the government doesn't have control over that. We'll have to look more
Kind of a
towards that.
saving grace.
Yeah.
I want to go to questions, but I want to hear from you two on this point of our two medias, if you agree with that thesis or don't, or what.
This is, you're just bringing it up, so I haven't been able to give it tons of thought, but, I mean, I think that their mainstream media has a legacy. And, you know, I mean, if you look back at the history of journalism, yeah, it started out as a wild, wild west. We're kind of back. We're back there. But more importantly, you know, there were the print outlets, and then comes radio. And that was supposed to hurt the print outlets, didn't. Then comes TV, that was supposed to kill radio, didn't happen. And then came the internet, that was gonna wipe us all out. Well, everybody is standing in their own space, adapting, finding ways to attract people who are interested in the news. And I think that shows a lot of strength in journalism as a whole.
Jesse?
This is nothing new for the United States. It's only in the last 50 to 100 years has there been a mainstream media.
Right.
From the beginning, journalism in the United States has always taken a side, going all the way back to before Alexander Hamilton.
Yeah.
Journalism has always been advocates. It's only recently we've said we're the neutral arbiters.
Right.
And around the world, there are plenty of examples we can find of a conservative media and a liberal media coexisting. You very rarely see a liberal media, a conservative media, and a mainstream media.
Yeah.
So we may be moving back to where we started from, where journalism has a side. You're on this side or that side.
Right.
Now, the bigger question, is that good or bad for our democracy?
Right.
Well, our democracy survived before, when there were opinionated journalism, advocacy journalism. We can survive it now. It's just different from what our generation, all of our generation, have grown up with over the last 50, 100 years.
The pro-Hamilton press referred to John Adams as hermaphroditic character. So they were slinging some mud back in those days too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
On our first day in our class, I kind of did the history of journalism with this theme, Wild Wild West to the Wild Wild West. And what I found was some clever YouTuber took the exact words from an attack on Thomas Jefferson and put it to video. It is hilarious.
Wow.
It's worth Googling to get it.
Once again, entertaining.
Yeah. Questions? In front.
Well, first of all, thank you for being here and coming to talk to us today.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask what you think of the power of satirists to point out the foolishness of something by joking about it instead of treating it as something serious, and how that plays into all of this.
This is for me, or all of us? Yeah, okay, I'll be really fast. Yeah, much more powerful a lot of times than politicians themselves. I would say it started in earnest with Jon Stewart, who's back on Monday nights. But, you know, 30 years ago, every late night comic didn't do strictly politics. You know, Johnny Carson told jokes about, you know, all kinds of things. So it's much more prevalent and much more influential.
And we were worried about people getting their news from comedians back then. There were polls that said 70% of the young people get their news from Jon Stewart and the world's gonna end. Now we're talking about 70% of people get their news from TikTok and the world's gonna end. Comedy has always had a place. Entertainment has always had a place in politics and in journalism. The thing that we in journalism have not figured out is how to make it profitable for us. Can we do it consistently? How can we get those eyeballs that watch Jon Stewart or Stephen Colbert? How do we get those eyeballs back to the real journalism instead of people talking about what we're doing? How can we get people to read what we're actually doing?
Let's take another question, and Gene and Liddy can start.
Hello, my name is Jaden. I am a law student here at George Washington, and I'm curious to hear about how you think artificial intelligence is and will continue to impact journalism and democracy. And this is for everyone on the panel. Thank you.
A law student in the tradition of Susan Tomasky, my sister, who went to law school here. Gene, why don't you start?
Well, people have approached AI from a lot of different perspectives. And the journalism world is alert and on guard, but they also have financial issues that would have them go ahead and use a product that could spare them several salaries. Have the automation do it and not the people do it. I mean, that's been part of, American business since the beginning, and we're at a new phase. There's concern about undermining credibility of your outlet if your readers find out you didn't actually send a person there, you did it with artificial intelligence. So some of what you see is that it's being used in specific ways to write captions, which can take a long time, and they've got to be correct and all of that. But, is that a place where you could use it and, have the cost benefit work? I think AI is going to be used in other businesses in a more robust way before that becomes true in journalism, simply because of the credibility issues that the journalists confront that other businesses don't necessarily have to face.
Liddy, do you think you'll be competing with
I am really confident that I won't have to be, because I know a lot of journalist students always think, oh, isn't journalism dying? What's going on? But you really can't report on human stories if it's not by a human. You need humans reporting on people. I think AI can be used as a tool in the future. It can be used for writing social media posts or just quick little things. But again, you always need a pair of human eyes looking that over before it's published to any audience. So I'm not scared. I don't think it's going to take out journalism because, like I said, you need humans to report on humans.
AI has been, by the way, AI has been part of our conversation, part of journalism for a long time. You just didn't know it. AI has been used for doing box scores, for doing scores for football games, for doing short briefs in newspapers and all the time. But just like Liddy said, it does not replace reporters going out talking to people. It has not learned how to do that. Until it learns how to do that, it's just another form of Wikipedia.
It's about time to wrap up. But I want to do one last question, okay? And we'll do a quick around the horn on this question. Yeah, we've survived a lot of things in this country, and democracy was going to die here, and then radio was going to die here, and TV was going to die there, and so on and so on. And we've slogged our way through all of it. Yet I can't help but think that this historical moment does feel different to me. I could spend an hour going into the reasons why, but I think you feel them too. We haven't been here before. So I'm pretty nervous. Am I right or wrong? And do this in 30 seconds, please.
I think you are right to be nervous. I think we should always be nervous about our democracy, about our republic. But I don't think that the walls are falling yet.
I think different generations face existential moments. I'm sure around the time of World War II that there were people who thought, oh my God, we may not make it. During the civil rights battles and the Vietnam War protests, that was an extremely hot moment in this country where probably many people thought the stakes are just, way out of control. I do think we're at one of those flexion points. And, it'll be up to the voters and the people to decide, do we sustain it? Or do we get to a point where maybe, we try to find some way to come back together? We'll see.
I think journalists always have to work no matter where democracy is, what it looks like in the country. But right now, kind of when we're at one of those flexion points, I think voters in the end are going to come together to do what we need to do to keep it going. And I have trust that people will do that.
Okay, let's hope. Well, I want to thank the School of Media and Public Affairs, Peter Loge, Sarah Morissette, our camera people, our sound people, our terrific panelists, and you guys. Thanks.
Jeffrey Howells, Professor Gene Cummings, Liddy Lake, and of course Michael Tomasky. This has been fascinating. I hope we get to it again. Thank you all for coming. Hope to see some of you tomorrow, next Tuesday, and throughout the semester. Onward into whatever comes next. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.